So diving right into it, my patient is a 30-year-old woman who presented with several years of left hip pain and difficulty ambulating. She's otherwise pretty healthy. And about 10 years ago, or when at the age of 10, so 20 years ago, she had a surgical history of hip dysplasia correction on that left hip. And she was riddled with multiple infections. This was performed in a Latin American country, and we didn't have access to those records. And she had multiple surgical debridements for this condition and finally presented infection-free. On her hip exam, she was very limited in her hip range of motion, and clinically, she was affected by a limb length discrepancy of approximately 5 centimeters, with that left hip being shorter than the right. Radiographically, it was more extreme at about 10 centimeters. When we look at her radiographs, we can see significant dysplasia of that left hip, along with a very high hip center of rotation, and some pelvic abnormalities, as we will see further on in this talk. Now, this is a lateral view of that left hip where you can see a very steep and a very small acetabulum. You can also see some retroversion in the femoral head and some very abnormal articulation at the joint, but the femoral head appears to be contained in that acetabulum. And since this is also an iliac oblique view of the left acetabulum, you can see a very nice and robust posterior column, which can help us with our fixation. So to try and understand this anatomy better, and Dr. Shafiq alluded to 3-dimensional CT reconstructions, I am a believer in them, especially for these complex deformities. And you can see 3 cardinal features. First and foremost, the obvious, which is that there is dysplastic hip on that left side, along with a prior shelf osteotomy, which was performed to contain that hip into its joint. Secondly, what's unique is that there is sacroiliac autofusion in this patient. And that has further ramifications, especially as the pelvis is oriented more in a dysmorphic fashion, in an inlet view fashion on that left hemipelvis compared to a more standard anterior-posterior view on the right hemipelvis. So that is contributing a lot to her deformity. When we look at a sagittal reconstruction of this patient, we can again see a very nice, robust posterior column. And you can see that whole left hemipelvis has shifted proximally, contributing to her limb length discrepancy and also how she holds her spinopelvic balance in trying to achieve correction. This is a frontal reconstruction where we can see a lot of cystic changes in the femoral head and in the acetabulum. We can also see that robust shelf osteotomy that we want to try and preserve, as that can help us contain our hip reconstruction. We also see a teardrop right there at the bottom, which is our target for our center of rotation restoration for our hip implantation. This is an axial reconstruction, and there are a couple of noteworthy points here. First and foremost, there is significant femoral retroversion. So it's as if the ice cream fell off the cone and the femoral head is sitting in a retroverted position. Secondly, the acetabulum has neutral to slight retroversion. So retroversion on the acetabulum, retroversion on the femur can be catastrophic, especially as we reconstruct this joint from a posterolateral approach, and can lend itself to posterolateral instability in this patient. Now, typically, dysplastics are more anteverted in the acetabulum and in the femur. So this was a unique situation for this patient. And because her sacroiliac joint is fixed, it's very difficult to control anything else with the pelvis. So in terms of trying to restore success surgically for this patient, we need to think about component positioning and restoring that center of rotation for the hip. We also need to appropriately select implants for this patient to try and give her some more anteversion in her hip. We should ideally respect an osteotomy, especially the shelf osteotomy, because it helped contain her native femoral head for almost 20 years, and it's also going to help us contain our prosthetic femoral head and our prosthesis. In order to try and reduce the hip sometimes, because of this limb length discrepancy, we may need to perform a subtrochanteric osteotomy. So it's important to keep that in our armamentarium and also to have reconstruction options to repair that osteotomy if we need to make it. We also need to think about injury to the neurovascular structures, especially a lot of traction injury to the sciatic nerve. And we need to counsel the patient appropriately beforehand if she were to lose sciatic nerve function intra-op or post-operatively. And finally, what's most important is to optimize this patient. Luckily for us, she's young, she's healthy, she doesn't have any medical issues, but we have to make sure to rule out an infection and then appropriately stage the procedure if there were to be an infection. And to understand patient expectations that, look, we may not be able to correct your limb length discrepancy completely because of such significant pelvic dysmorphism, despite all the features and all the planning that we can perform for her. So just to give her that expectation beforehand is absolutely essential. In terms of planning, we created a 3D CT printed model to see which approach to use in this situation. So I thought, since she has so much retroversion, why don't we try and use an anterior or anterolateral approach for this patient? In that situation, you can see this is a reconstruction right there, where it's very difficult to look anteriorly and to appreciate the joint space. Looking at it from the posterior approach, we're able to find a nice plane to work to try and achieve our surgical goals. In the orange arrow, you can see that shelf osteotomy. Next, you can see superiorly, you have a nice shelf osteotomy, and you also have the native femoral head, which is being covered very nicely with that shelf osteotomy. And finally, if I was a posterolateral surgeon and an operating surgeon, and I'm looking at the patient, what would it look like to me? So this is the reconstruction where we can see our planned femoral neck resection. And this is what the acetabulum would look like in this patient. So I chose the standard posterolateral approach and extensile approach in my hands for such a difficult case. So here I want to try and orient you in this surgical picture. That's the greater trochanter. That's the femoral neck resection. And finally, that's the acetabulum. After a little bit of cleanup of that acetabulum, you can appreciate that shelf osteotomy in the triangle right there. And you can appreciate the significant acetabular retroversion that we need to account for in our reaming and preparation of the acetabulum for the hip prosthesis. Postoperatively, this is her immediate postoperative X-ray. So we used a size 48 millimeter DePuy Pinnacle multi-hole cup. We really preserved that shelf osteotomy to try and engage that superior aspect of the cup to prevent further proximal migration. We tried to bring the cup down to the native center of rotation as much as possible by reaming down into that acetabulum. And we put a nice small cup, which allowed us to have a 32 millimeter head with excellent support in her native bone. We also used a version control stem for her to try and give her some antiversion to prevent posterior instability. This is her image at 12 months of follow-up, again showing that shelf osteotomy has nicely contained this prosthesis, and she's had no dislocations, no infections, no instability. And let me show you some videos of her function. So this is her ambulating. She still ambulates and now with back towards a limb. Because of the limb length discrepancy that we were not able to fully correct in her, that we gave her that expectation preoperatively. And then you can see the flexion and extension of the hip. And again, you can see excellent stability of this prosthesis, even if she's keeping her leg internally rotated to achieve a very functional hip and a pain-free hip for this patient. This is her most recent follow-up last year at about 24 months, and she's due for another follow-up this fall. And you can see, again, everything is well fixed in her and nothing has loosened or nothing has dislocated. So in our experience, this was the first case in an adult patient who has a combination of a pelvic dysmorphism, a unilateral SI joint fusion, and developmental dysplasia, and then underwent a total hip replacement. So we looked this up and we published our experience with this patient. And I wanted to share a couple of thoughts about this. So now we know that developmental dysplasia of the hip, especially with the Crowe-Ranawat classification, is the proximal displacement sometimes of the femoral head with a dysplastic acetabulum and subluxation of that femoral head. Another classification that helps us plan surgery is this Greek Hartophylakides classification, in which you can see a normal to a dislocated hip and how you correct for this deformity. Along with dysplasia of the hip, what's also common is pelvic dysplasia, which is not as commonly reported, but it can occur, especially in the pediatric population. So here you see a patient with a right-sided dysplastic hip with an absent superior pubic ramus, and then a Salter osteotomy to try and correct that dysplastic hip. Here is another example of a patient with bilateral dysplastic hips and a very abnormal or dysmorphic looking pelvic rim, along with bilateral absent superior pubic rami. So it's very important to note that there may be some disorders in the mesenchymal stem cells and how they migrate and how they form these bony and cartilaginous structures. So you have to account for that in your surgical presentation and in your surgical planning for these patients, because dysplasia can go along with pelvic dysmorphism. So what are some lessons that we learned from our case? Let's look at the acetabulum first. The first thing we want to do is to go low. We want to really try and restore that center of rotation, because traditionally high hip centers are easy to place, but it's very hard to medialize all the way to that medial column to engage that good cancellous bone. And at the same time, the shearing forces on the acetabulum in that high hip center are very high, and they can loosen pretty quickly with time. So it's important to try and take your time, identify the base of the acetabulum, and go into that. Now, to achieve big results in these patients, you really have to think small. The dysplastic hip is a very wide hip, and the acetabulum can be very wide, and you may be tempted to use a very big reamer in that situation to try and engage some kind of rim support to try and get some fixation. But you have to think small. You have to really start with a small reamer, keep it at the teardrop level, medialize, and then achieve some sort of a superior shelf. If there is one, use that. If there isn't one, then create that with your reamer in that medial position to try and get some bony fixation for your prosthesis. If you need, you can also use other augments such as the femoral head to try and keep the hip contained in that low position. In terms of bearing surfaces, traditionally people have looked at metal on polyethylene, but with newer generation of polyethylene and ceramic, the hip reconstruction surgeon really favors ceramic on polyethylene for these patients. In terms of version, it's important to check your combined anteversion. 70% of dislocations that happen in dysplastic hips happen anteriorly. So you really want to account for that anteversion in them. In our case, we actually had to give her some anteversion to try and bring her out of retroversion. So you need control on the acetabular side and also on the femoral side, which is often overlooked in these patients, to achieve an optimal combined anteversion. And finally, what are our thoughts on dual mobility or constrained liners? So, studies have shown that if you get to a 48 millimeter cup, you're typically able to get to a 32 millimeter head. And at that point, the stability seems to be equal to patients who do not have dysplasia. But if you're not able to get to that cup, you may want to start with a dual mobility cup to optimize your head-neck ratio to try and achieve good primary stability. Or as Dr. Levin showed in his talk, try and achieve constraint with multi-point fixation with screws. On the femoral side, again, you need version control. So I prefer to use a stem that gives me 360 degrees of version control. It can either be modular or it can be a monoblock stem, depending on what works best in your hands. You really need to think about a subtrochanteric osteotomy if you're going to be correcting some massive limb length discrepancies in these patients. And this is a figure showing how to do that. Now, with a subtrochanteric osteotomy, you want a stem that has some diaphyseal engagement to provide stability. And at the same time, you need to counsel patients that they may lose soft tissue tensioning and there may be increased risk of hip instability with such an osteotomy. There has been a report of neuromonitoring being used in these patients, especially when the sciatic nerve is on stretch. So consider that if you're thinking of correcting this deformity significantly. And finally, please think about having augments, please think about having cables and allografts available to you readily in correcting these deformities, because you never know how to approach them sometimes and how much equipment you may need. So it's better to be prepared than to go in and face any difficulties further. With that, I would like to thank you again for your attention. Thank you to Ashok for hosting us, and to the Bombay Orthopaedic Society and to Wiroc. And I'm happy to take any questions via email.